So someone asked me to review the whole situation which led up to the Windle Turley lawsuit and how that was perceived by different devotees, especially the ISKCON reform movement in 1997, which was just getting going. So I wanted to start out with a little bit of history, which is there really was no recorded documentation of the child abuse that was going on in and around ISKCON in the 1980s. So the first person that put something together was Sulochan. He began to interview a few mothers, and he got their accounts of their children being abused, and he wrote something in his documents at that time. But a lot of people don't realize that at that time there was no internet, so we were making paper copies of our documents and photocopying them and handing them out here and there to a few people. It wasn't really a big, widely organized, structured situation. It was just some haphazard thing where we would hand out a few papers here and there to a few people. But he was starting the idea of collating and organizing and documenting the abuse cases that were going on in ISKCON, and it's possibly one of the reasons that he was taken out, because he realized, there's a lot of abuse going on, but it's not being documented, it's not being organized. We don't know who the abusers are, who the victims are, all that type of thing. And it is still that way to a large extent. But anyway, what started to happen in the 90s, which is when the internet got rolling, is that I started a online newsletter which I was sending to different people, and maybe a few hundred people, and I was getting different kinds of feedback from parents whose children had been victimized. And by that time some of the victims were also adults or young adults, and so I was getting some feedback from them about the abuse that had been going on. But one of the critical things which I really began to mention in my newsletter was that victims by that time were young adults, and there was a growing suicide epidemic going on amongst these people. So I began to write about that in my newsletter. And there was another newsletter being made by Pranada at the time, and she also mentioned the same thing, that there had been some suicides going on amongst these victims. So this was turning into a crisis. In my opinion, the suicides would have continued and gotten worse. And that was the opinion of a few other people, like Prachitos. So Prachitos said we need to start a lawsuit because we need to bring some kind of relief and help to these victims, or the suicides will continue and get worse. So that was the belief of a small group of us who formed kind of a steering committee to address the child abuse situation going on in the society and the problem of the suicides. And another problem was that the abuse was ongoing. It was still going on in India, especially in places like Mayapur. So this was just a crisis on every level. The previous victims were in distress, and new victims were being generated simultaneously. So a lawsuit would really help solve a lot of that, because it would alert the society at large that there is a problem of abuse going on. And so, anyway, to make a long story short, a lawsuit was started by Windle Turley, and I advertised that lawsuit in my newsletter. And I was also handing out papers around Los Angeles Temple, advertising the case and recruiting victims to sign up for the case. So a number of children victims were signing up for the case. Now it got to over 500. Windle Turley said he didn't want more than 500 originally, but it was looking like 1,000 were signing up. And I was told by various victims that another 1,000 would have signed up. So in other words, it looks like maybe 2,000 would have been involved if they had been allowed. And the question I get on a regular basis If there were so many cases, then why were none of these cases, or almost none of these cases, ever reported to the authorities? How could there be so many cases going on left, right, and center, and almost none of them being reported to the authorities, and almost none of the parents coming out and protesting, or making signs and going in front of the temple, or just making a newsletter to notify the other parents that there's a problem? So it just looks like the issue was being smothered over on so many levels. And that's why I just went on and on and on, because it was just a conspiracy of silence. I was told that by a number of victims. This is a conspiracy of silence. The leaders, the parents, they're not saying anything, but they know this is going on. And so this was how the problem had to be eventually taken to court, because in court, the issue is publicly known. So we had to make this publicly known somehow or other to save more people from becoming victims. And more would have become victims. And some of the people who were pulled out of the schools thanked me for saving their life. They said, we were in their school, and because of this lawsuit, we got pulled out of that school, and that saved us from a lot of suffering, because we were suffering there. So they thanked me for saving them. In other words, no one else was going to do that. Who else was going to save them minus this court case? Nobody. The cavalry was not arriving. It just was not coming. And later on, some victims were getting compensation from the court case, and I think some of them got at the most $30,000, $25,000. Others got $10,000, others got $5,000, something like that. But same thing, a number of them wrote to congratulate me for getting them something. They said we would have had nothing. We would have been homeless, living in a car in front of the temple, and no one ever would have given us any help. So this court case gave us some money, and we were able to get some kind of a training class, or get a car, or get an apartment, or get something going in their lives. They had no, what I would call, seed money. Of course, I got criticized for stealing money from ISKCON to give to these lousy, fringy, useless people who aren't contributing anything to ISKCON. Well, okay. You just had no plan for them. All right, let's just face the facts. There was no organized plan to help these kids and get them set up, rolling into their adult life. They didn't get educated properly in many cases. They weren't being given money in many cases. And they just had no support in many cases. And that is one of the reasons there was a suicide problem. They did not feel supported. And they were right about that. Now, one of the complaints I get on a regular basis is that these kids were saying negative things about Prabhupada and Krishna and the Krishna religion in general. And they also told that to Windle Turley, that they believe that Prabhupada and Krishna religion is bogus, and that is the reason they suffered, because of the religion. And so I got a lot of flack from different critics for saying, oh, I supported these children's criticisms of the religion. Well, that never happened. I never said I supported their criticisms, but I did say that I understand their criticisms. I mean, if you had your teeth knocked out, or your bones were broken, or you were being sodomized, and you were being told this is what God wants to happen in your life, you might have a bad attitude towards the religion. I mean, I'm just shocked and surprised that anybody would even think that these children should have a positive image of the religion. Why would they? I mean, it's just not common sense. If people are mistreated by a company, then they write letters protesting, this company cheated me, this company gave me a bad product, and they sue the company and all the rest of it. If you give people a bad product, they're not going to be happy with the product, and they're going to complain about the company that gave them that product. And that is just simple common sense. But meanwhile, how was I going to change the opinion of these children? I mean, I can't just wave a magic wand and say people who were victims of severe abuse should now love the religion. I don't have that potency to do that, and neither do my critics. I mean, my critics don't come to San Francisco to find the victims and convince them that the religion is all rosy, cozy, and wonderful. They never come here to try to fix the opinion of these children, because they can't. They can't. I can't. It just can't be done. Once people are burned with a bad product, it's very difficult to convince them that the product is good. That's just the way life works. You know, the kids who were molested by the Catholic Church are not going to be enthusiastic about going back to that church. But what my critics don't understand is that that was never the purpose of the case. To give the children a favorable understanding of the religion was not the reason the case was filed. The case was filed because they were leaving their bodies and they were dying, okay? And we had to stop that. And if you're talking about bad publicity, if many victims had left their bodies, that also would have been in the media. It would have been a giant media story. You know, you can't just keep covering up something like that indefinitely. But the other problem was that we were creating simultaneously a fresh new wave of victims, and that would have created another whole wave of people taking their lives. So it just never would have ended, except it would have ended up on the front pages of the New York Times as a horrible satanic death cult or who knows what. You can't just have people leaving their bodies around your religion, left, right, and center, and not expect some kind of a reaction. And the reaction would have eventually happened, with or without me having anything to do with that. So you have to save the lives of victims if you want to save the name of your company. You can't just allow an unsafe baby seat to keep killing babies over and over and over again. You cover up the reports about that, and you just hope the problem goes away, but it doesn't go away. And eventually the baby seat company is all over the media, and it looks like they intentionally sold a dangerous product, knowing that it was harming children. So that would have been the type of media that would have been produced by allowing the situation to continue. And I even asked some of these people at the time, is that the headline you want to see? And they said, yeah, who cares? Why not? They just didn't have any clue that that would be a worse headline. The headline that you're trying to fix the problem is better than you did nothing to fix the problem and let it go on for 20 years and just accumulated piles and piles and piles of dead victims. You can't just do that. But they don't understand these kind of things. But molester cults and people in molester cults rarely do understand these things. They just don't get it. So, fortunately, the court case did reduce the suicides substantially, and many kids were pulled out, and those were the objectives that I had. To change the attitude of the children was not one of my objectives. I didn't think it was even possible to do that. But some of the victims at least said, wow, thank God you did something. Maybe the religion isn't totally 100% rotten. You got a few good apples in there, and you're one of the good apples. So I gave them at least some encouragement that some people in the religion do have some idea what needs to be done with this kind of situation. Anyway, the next problem was that then Krishna Kant of the IRM, he decided to go to war with me, with Pod. And he made an announcement to the devotees at a meeting that he was going to war with me. And what was he going to go to war about? Well, the molesting issue. He doesn't agree that I should have addressed the molesting issue and the book changes issue. I said we have to sue the BBT to get the rights for original books. He said I was antagonizing the GBC by doing that. He was going to make a deal with Jayapataka to get original books. Of course, that was never going to happen. It was just pie in the sky. And I shouldn't address the poison issue, where public complaints of being poison. So the molesting issue, the book changes issue, the poison issue, we have to drop all that. I have to go to the Caribbean on a vacation where I'll never return alive, probably. I mean, many people thought that was completely whacked. I mean, Krishna Khan is working a deal with Jayapataka for me to go to the Caribbean and drop the pod newsletter. And he said he's used me as a bargaining chip. Well, when did I agree to be a bargaining chip? I don't think I ever did. So he wanted to compromise. He wanted to compromise with the leaders of ISKCON. And he's very upset that I refused the deal that he had made. He went through a lot of work, meeting with Jayapataka to get this whole arrangement done. Yeah, we're going to have Franjan go to the Caribbean. Yeah, he's not going to have a newsletter. And yeah, we're going to have Jayapataka become a Ritvik. But the people in Bangalore didn't want Jayapataka back there again anyway, whether he was a Ritvik or a regular guru or a full Acharya guru or whatever. They didn't want to work with him anymore. They were done with Jayapataka. And Jayapataka was the leader of a big child molesting ring, webs, and nests program going on in Mayapur. Why should anybody want to work with that guy at all? But Krishna Kant was insisting, we got to work with this guy. No, we don't want to work with this guy. And working with this guy is simply helping the molesting program that's going on in Mayapur. Now, some people have said these children are money-hungry, greedy people. They're just trying to destroy ISKCON, and they're nonsense, and they're not following, and they're taking intoxicants, and having illicit sex, and all these different things. Oh, right. How did they get into that situation? You know, they were 5-year-old children in the society, and they became fallen people who had no sympathy for the religion anymore. How did they come to that situation? So, you know, I don't believe this argument that it's just their karma and this was destined to happen to them. I believe they were mishandled and mistreated, and therefore it's not their fault. At least not entirely their fault. The main blame for them getting into that situation is the adults and the leaders who created that situation. So I don't blame these victims. I don't think blaming victims is a good idea. And if you look in the ordinary world, if some guy puts up a video where he's beating up a rabbit or something like that, it just creates a total outrage everywhere, and everybody's saying, go get this guy and arrest this guy and all the rest of it. Well, these children were beaten up and mistreated very badly, and some of them have said they were in Auschwitz for kids. So how would you handle that situation? If you were a defenseless kid in that situation and you were being assaulted and insulted and verbally and mentally and spiritually and physically abused in so many ways, how would you handle that situation? You know, you got to look at it from that point of view, and that is how I look at it. I say, what would happen to me if I was there in their shoes? Put yourself in their shoes and think. Just think for a minute, you being there, like them. Now, little kids are, you know, when they're 5 and you put them on the bus to go to kindergarten, they're crying and all the rest of it. They're not happy to leave their parents, you know. So it's a very vulnerable state to be 5 years old. You know, you got to put yourself in that state yourself. So they're in this very fragile, very vulnerable state, and they're being exploited severely. So I expect a bad result and a bad reaction. And I think covering up the result and covering up the reaction makes it worse for them, makes it worse for the victims. It's like nullifying what happened and ignoring and denying what happened. And that is not healthy for them. And it's not healthy for us as a society. A society that mistreats children has to have a reckoning. at some point. And if it doesn't, then it will cease to function as a society. And that's really my opinion. If we don't come to grips with this situation sooner or later, then later there won't be anything to even discuss. It will just dissolve into dust. And rightly it should. We shouldn't have a society where this mistreatment level is happening and nothing is done, and people just are going on with the same leadership that created all this like nothing happened. So when the lawsuit was filed and the suicides went down, one of the reasons was that the victims had been validated. They were thinking, it's my fault, it's my karma, I'm to blame for all this, and it reduced their self-esteem and self-worth to the point where some of them were taking their lives, and many of them were depressed and taking intoxicants and all these kind of things. So we have to validate them and their suffering as not being their fault and not being their karma and all the rest of it. So you're a child in a society where everyone is reading the Bhagavad Gita, and the Bhagavad Gita says you must fight injustice, you must take down injustice, and you're a child in that society. All kinds of injustice is being done to you and your friends when you're children, and nobody's doing anything. The leaders aren't doing anything. The parents aren't even calling the police. They're not ringing the alarm bell to alert other parents. And so all this stuff just goes on and on and on. Where's the defense of the defenseless? It doesn't seem to be happening. So I am not surprised these children have lost faith in the process. And I don't think, to be honest, that the adults had much faith in the process either, or they would not have allowed all this to happen. All this happened under their watch, the leaders and the parents. So where is their faith in the idea that you have to defend the defenseless? It just did not happen, and it still is not happening because, unfortunately, like I said, the same leaders who caused all this are still sitting in big seats, being worshipped, and all the rest of it, as if nothing happened. How does that make the victims feel? Well, not good. Not good at all. So that is why there's depression and difficulty in the victim group. I believe that. It's not being resolved. So there were problems in the Gurukula system in the 70s. We knew, at least some of us knew, and we knew that these problems had not been resolved. It wasn't really a wholesale abuse system like we saw after 1978, but there was some abuse going on, and therefore all these senior devotees should have sat down and had a serious discussion about how to resolve the crisis in the Gurukula system and maybe disband the system for the time being until we can get it up and running properly or something like that. Instead, the senior devotees all ganged up against me and said we need to send our kids to the GBC guru schools. But I didn't accept that any of these people were gurus, and I didn't accept that they were competent to handle children or that children should worship these GBC gurus. I didn't think this was a bona fide idea whatsoever. So the whole thing should have been stopped at that time, and if we couldn't stop it, we should at the very least not place our children into their system, which is what I did. I did not send my kids to their school because I didn't have any confidence in any of these people. They're conditioned souls, they're posing as gurus, and our children should not worship conditioned souls. It's not going to end well, and it didn't. And I have a whole chorus of complainers and critics who don't like what I'm doing. For example, Sanat, Mukunda, Prahlad, ISKCON Jaipur, Krishna Kirtan, and Mathurapati, these kind of guys. So they started out complaining that Pranjan is driving a taxi around San Francisco and he's moving around meat pizzas and prostitutes and drug dealers and gay couples and all kinds of sinful people. This is very sinful. He needs to stop doing that. That's the problem with ISKCON. Pranjan is driving a taxi in San Francisco. Oh, Jayananda was also driving a taxi in San Francisco. But notice what's happening. They don't care when I say children are being starved, beaten, abused, molested, sexually assaulted, all kinds of things. That is not the problem. The problem is somebody got into my taxi with a pizza. That's the whole problem. And if we could just stop that problem, then everything in ISKCON will be fine. So they don't want these problems fixed. But, of course, the other question is, who volunteered me and who signed me up to fix anything? So I had to mention the changed books in my newsletter, start a legal steering committee to make a lawsuit, to go after the BBTI for changing the books. Well, who signed me up and gave me that job? Nobody. I had to say children are being molested, they're taking their lives, this is a problem, let's make a steering committee, let's make a lawsuit. Okay, well, who signed me up for that? And then I came out and said, Prabhupada said he is being poisoned. And boy, did I get a lot of flack for that. Again, who signed me up to bring that issue out? Nobody. So I'm just doing this stuff, and I'm driving a taxi to support what I'm doing, okay? But, what can I say? You can't please the unpleasable. Meanwhile, these guys didn't bring any of this stuff out. They didn't bring out the molesting issue, change books issue, poison issue, until much later, maybe, somewhat, but we had to spearhead and pioneer all these issues. And I'm not complaining, somehow or other, I think Krishna gave me this job. That's all. Everybody gets their job from Krishna. Really. So I'm not complaining. Krishna gave me this situation, put me in this situation. You're going to be driving a taxi, and you're going to be getting crap from everybody as soon as you say children should not be molested, books should not be changed, and Prabhupada should not have been poisoned. As soon as you say that, watch out. The crap is going to hit the fan, and you're going to have a lot of opponents and objectors and all the rest of it. And that is because it is Kali Yuga. And these things are all going on due to the mercy of Kali Yuga. And somebody like me, and just a little pinhead, pinwheel, nobody nonsense taxi driver, is not going to really fix much of it. And I haven't fixed much of it, but I have at least addressed it and fixed some of it, which is more than most people did. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but if other people had joined in this effort, it wouldn't have never gotten this bad on any of these issues. But, it is what it is, and Krishna's in control, and I just have to surrender, and I'm trying to do that. And I hope this helps people understand these issues. Hari, Hari, Bol.